Good evening, everyone. Good to see you and good to be with you. Welcome. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood, I think, and people are out playing. So, welcome. Will and I are in the same room, so I'm going to mute so Will can say hello too.
Good evening, everyone. Wonderful to see you all here on this wonderful summer evening. Thank you for joining us. And it's great to see you for this final session of this course on the cosmic Krishna and Christ, which is something very dear to our hearts. So we're very happy to be here to share this with you. So I think this evening, Cynthia is going to lead off, and then we'll be sort of back and forth. So I'm going to turn it over to Cynthia.
Why don't we start with a little bit of meditation, a little bit of silence, and for a few minutes, and then I'm going to dive into chapter 12 of the Gita with a few passages from chapter 12, which is titled The Way of Love, and would like to just share those passages for reflection and also some of the ways that I've worked with it in my life. So let's start with some silence. So I invite you to close your eyes or have a soft gaze away from the keyboard, away from the computer, and maybe just about 5 minutes. We'll sit. Welcome again, everyone. Really good to see you. And so here we are on the last session of this course for the time being. And as we started out saying, 4 weeks, it does not do justice to this timeless sacred scripture. I would just want to note that. And at the same time, we've begun, and some of us, it's a revisit of this scripture, or it may be something that we practice with on a daily basis. So I just want to recognize that there's so much more to dive into, and we encourage you to do so, even though this course is going, this is the last evening for this particular session. I want to speak about chapter 12, which will be going into more fully that chapter and a couple other chapters this evening in what he has to share. But I want to talk about the practical aspects of the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita. It is just such a practical, as Eknath Ishwaran, who I've mentioned as my teacher, my meditation teacher, he would say, it is just, and he has books around how it's the daily life, how we live out the scripture on a daily basis. So I'm going to share a little bit from the Way of Love, chapter 12. And Arjuna asks the question of Krishna, of those steadfast devotees who love you and those who seek you as an eternal formless reality, who are the more established in yoga? And Krishna starts to answer, but I'm pulling out the section 8 from chapter 12, the section 8 through scripture 8 through 18. Hopefully I'll get through it in my time. In fact, I need to time myself so I don't go over, because I could go over because it just lives in me. And it's just so fun to talk about all this. So Krishna says, though, still your mind in me, still your intellect in me, and without doubt you will be united with me forever. If you cannot still your mind in me, learn to do so through the regular practice of meditation. If you lack the will for such self-discipline, engage yourself in my work, for selfless service can lead you at last to complete fulfillment. If you're unable to do this even, surrender yourself to me, disciplining yourself and renouncing the results of all your actions. Better indeed is knowledge than mechanical practice. Better than knowledge is meditation. But better still is surrender of attachment to results, because there follows immediate peace. So Krishna is saying here, there are so many ways that you can come to me. Just if this doesn't work, then try this. If this doesn't work, then try this. And isn't that lovely? I mean, to have so many options, and to the point of, if you can't sit regularly and in meditation and silencing because of this monkey mind going crazy all the time, then try this and try serving. Everything you do, everything I do, make it a service to God, service to the divine, every action you take. And so I just love that, because it just gives so many pathways for coming to the divine, to Krishna. Krishna says, that one I love who is incapable of ill will, who is friendly and compassionate, living beyond the reach of I and mine and of pleasure and pain, patient, contented, self-controlled, firm in faith, with all their heart and all their mind given to me, with such as these I am in love. So let's unpack that a minute. First of all, with that last part, with such as these, I am in love. This is a love relationship, the way of love. It's not what, it's reciprocal. It's like we are doing this together. And I love God. I love the divine. I love that place of the ultimate reality. And when I give my whole self to the divine, to that ultimate reality, I am met there. I am met there and I am flooded. We see this in Rumi's poetic scriptures and sacred wisdom words that he speaks. We see it across the spiritual traditions. Well, let me find my document again here. Here we go. So that one I love, who is incapable of ill will, who is friendly and compassionate. There's the practical. Think back today of what your day's been like. Have you been friendly? Have you been compassionate to every being, everything you've met along the path? That's the practice right there, right? We had we're in a different area. We're on a little bit of holiday, although we're working most of the time. But we're away from our normal house, and we where we're staying doesn't have a good internet connection, and so we've asked to use a conference room. And the first day we did it, the woman we talked to was, oh sure, no problem. Then we called for having the conference room tonight, and we met with another woman, and she was like, no, you can't have it. um, it's just not going to work, and it's too long a time, and there's a rental charge and all this. And so in that practice of the Gita, it was like, how do I find the compassion in my heart? How do I not have ill will against one who is blocking my way? So take a moment and think about your own life. Let's just take a moment to reflect on that and think about today in particular. Have you met up, or the last couple days, have you met up with people or situations that have taken you off the path of, being compassionate, being loving? And maybe you have, and maybe you haven't, and that's grand. But in the face of practice, and that's what the Gita is offering us, is a practical way of coming and meeting every day, every moment, the reminder to come back to that place of compassion, that place of not having ill will for someone, for being friendly. It says living beyond the reach of I and mine. What is mine? What am I? What's in it for me? And truly coming to a place of how can I serve? How can I be of service and make sure that whoever I meet along the path is getting what they need too? Living beyond the reach of I and mine and of pleasure and pain. Being patient, contented, self-controlled, firm in faith, with all their heart and all their mind given to me, with such as these I am in love. So right there in that one little phrase, it's one sentence actually, one paragraph, that's a practice in and of itself. And I could work with that and do work with that all the time. I'm reading this particular one because it is one that guides my life pretty much every day. Not agitating the world or by it agitated. They stand above the sway of elation, competition, and fear. That one is my beloved. Wow, I mean, right now, think about everything going on in the world. Just that practice of how to be in this world and not of it, how to walk in the world and not open the news and be agitated by it, or to get elated by something that happened and down because of another event that happens that becomes a roller coaster ride, which I've talked about before. They are detached, pure, efficient, impartial, never anxious, selfless in all their undertakings. They are my devotees, very dear to me. That one is dear to me who runs not after the pleasant or away from the painful, grieves not, lusts not, but lets things come and go as they happen. That devotee who looks upon friend and foe with equal regard. So there's an interesting one. That devotee who looks upon friend and foe with equal regard. That's not an easy one. And I've had deep appreciation for people who, in restorative justice, for example, who have had something happen in their life where there's been a crime, even a major violation, and yet they find the place within themselves to come to a place of forgiveness, a place of reconciling that, to come to a place of forgiveness. Again, a deep practice. I've often wondered if something happened at that dramatic level. I mean, for example, one of our friends, Mpo Tutu, who is Desmond Tutu's daughter, had a murder happen in her own home, in her daughter's bedroom. And her father, Desmond Tutu and Mpo Tutu, wrote a book on forgiveness after that happened. And it was a murder of her housekeeper. And to come to that place of forgiveness, I think that's really where we are, where I am. And I think we as a society, as a world, are, with all that's happening around, George Floyd's death, for example, in the United States, or all of the unjust murders or violations that happen. How do we come to a place, if this scripture is our guide, how do we come to a place of looking at that without, with the equal regard, the devotee who looks upon friend and foe with equal regard? I'm not saying I'm there, but it's a practice, isn't it? It's one where, again, thinking of like Martin Luther King Jr., who, when during the civil rights movement in the US, where he would come across, in one of the practices of nonviolent action, is when he would come face to face with those who were trying to beat him down or beat the others down, he would look at them and he'd say, I love you with agape love. I do not like your behavior, but I love you. And to come to that place of finding that highest consciousness possible, even if it's not there, the highest of possibilities in the other, is what I think this scripture is calling us to. It's not to put up with behavior that is out of alignment, that is doing harm or doing injustice, but it's how do you find, as in Buddhism, it would be the Buddha nature in everything and in everyone, so that you can have that equanimity, if you will, with friend and foe. So that devotee who looks upon friend and foe with equal regard, who is not buoyed up by praise nor cast down by blame. So it's like, when things are good, tell me how good I am, tell me the positive, but if you tell me anything negative and give me negative feedback, then I'm gonna plummet. So that's a practice. If it sure feels good when people are giving me positive things, but as soon as you've got something negative to tell me, my ego gets involved at a whole nother level. And so working with it at that regard, in that way, alike in heat and cold, pleasure and pain, free from self-attachments, the same in honor and dishonor, quiet, ever full, in harmony everywhere, firm in faith. Such a one is dear to me. So when I look or read this scripture and come to a place of practicing with this, the place that I enter into the Gita is that it is for daily living. It's not like I'm going to be there. It's not like I've reached the goal of seeing friend and foe in the same way. I'm still working on it. But that is the practice, right? That is going back to the beginning where Krishna says, let me find it here. He says, still your mind in me, still your intellect in me, and without doubt you will be united with me forever. If you cannot still your mind in me, learn to do so through the regular practice of meditation. If you lack the will for such self-discipline, engage yourself in my work, for selfless service can lead you at last to complete fulfillment. If you are unable to do even this, surrender yourself to me, disciplining yourself and renouncing the results of all your actions. So I'm doing a broad stroke over this, but if I take just that part of this particular chapter, I work on every part of this. I don't do just one piece of it. If I meditate, I have a regular practice of meditation. I try to be in self-discipline. I engage myself in work for selfless service. And I work to surrender myself to the divine, renouncing the actions, the results of my actions. So whatever, and that's still a practice too. So as you dive in, if you choose to dive into the Gita further, really encourage you to look at it as a practical guide for living, a practical daily guide for living, much like some of you are part of the Course in Miracles, much like that it really is something that you can pick up and every day have another piece of something to practice with. And it's just a beautiful way I've found to move through the world and really work when things come up with agitations or painful situations, joyful situations, to really work with not getting, just, I guess, going on the middle path, as Buddha would say, and staying on the straight and narrow of it. So why don't we just take a moment of transition and take another moment, and I invite you to close your eyes or have a soft gaze, and we can enter into just a few moments of reflection of what spoke to you in this particular passage from the Gita, and how and what parts of it you might see yourself, maybe you are working with in your practice, or what parts of it are you drawn to. So just for a minute or two, we'll be in silent reflection. So bringing your attention back and to the full group, opening your eyes. I just want to open it up for a few minutes for any reflections, ways that you practice or ways that you may have been drawn to what this was shared in the passage that I shared tonight. So whoever feels moved, you can just unmute and share.
Oh, Cynthia, if I could start.
Sure, Margaret.
So I guess I'm always struck in all of the teachings with the Gita, how the similarity with the Course in Miracles, and of course with other teachings, but all of the things that you were saying, the going within, those aspects. Yeah, so that's what comes up for me, is just I feel very much in harmony with what the teachings are. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. I agree. I think it aligns pretty well with the Course in Miracles in those practical daily practices that it calls us to. Yeah, beautiful. Anyone else?
Hi, Annie here.
Hi, Annie.
Hey, happy to be here as always. This really spoke to me. I find it very, very comforting that we're offered so many options, you know. It just gives you hope when you feel like you're struggling. And I think for me too, it's a combination of them, of trying to live and act right and work for social justice and to live compassionately, and also to try to gain more knowledge and to meditate. But for me, mostly it's bhakti yoga. Really, it's devotion. It's trying through practice, mainly through chanting, through invoking the names of God, sung mantra of letting go, letting go, letting go over and over, and then hopefully by grace, being able to surrender over time.
That's really it, Annie. Thank you. I mean, from what I understand and from what I've experienced, the small amount of just as I practice, and I'm sure others of you have felt this, that there comes times that there is an ease to it. It doesn't feel like we're climbing the mountain all the time, but we're met, and there's an easefulness. And I do think that from all that's reported, that happens more often as we continue to practice. And one thing Jetsun Matinson Palmo said and says, and it's really important, is, and it's stated here in the Gita, if you're not drawn, or if you're not able to sit in silent meditation, then every act that you do out in the world, everybody you meet, everybody you pass, is your practice to be more compassionate, to be more heart-filled, to be more loving. And that's sometimes really hard with certain people. I want to complete my story there because we did get the room, by the way. Someone else came in and the woman called and left a really nice message saying we could have the room, no charge. And Will and I were talking and thought, I was already thinking this, but that I wanted to just send a note of it, rather than be an outrage, which we felt, we got to have some internet here, but help us out here. But to be in just in the process of it and let it unfold and see what happens and let the energy shift and change, knowing that it's not only up to us, there's many elements working, many on the invisible realm. And then, to offer something back in gratitude for what's been given to us as well. And so that's our work now, it's not work, it's actually joyful to be able to write to this person and the people here and thank them for the offering that they gave so that they could be in service to all of us tonight. Yeah. So I think I'm going to bring it to a close unless there's one last comment that is burning to be said. Terry, do you have something?
Yeah, I was just on the piece of meditation. I remember my drumming instructor who said she could never meditate, but how she learned to meditate was through drumming.
Aha.
So it's through, however, whatever the path is. So it doesn't have to be meditation per se, but she gets to meditate through drumming.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. So, and to find that inner peace or inner stillness through action, even, is the key, isn't it? So, yeah. Thank you for that, Terry. So, we're going to move over to Will. Welcome to those of you who have joined. We're glad to see you. It's nice to have the group forming here, even at a grander scale. And Will's going to take it from here. And thank you for your presence and attention for the first half hour.
So continuing, I just want to note that Cynthia's halo is really quite gorgeous tonight. Do you see it? I was quite struck. Mine is a little one-sided off to the left, but Cynthia's is just centered. She's got the divine light just showering down. It's great what kind of images we get from our Zoom backgrounds, right? Anyway, there's the proof that she's my better half, if you will.
I'm not half, neither are you. We're wholes together.
So, yeah, excuse my humor. Okay, so here we are in this final session of this course. I'd like to begin with just a brief invocation of the Supreme Secret, which is what we're going to be leading up to tonight. So I will just briefly recite it, and then we will move through the chapters that lead up to it. Man mana bhava mad bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru mam evaishyasi satyam te pratijane priyosi me. Sarva dharman parityaja mam ekam sharanam vraja aham tva sarva papebhyo mokshayishyami ma shucha. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So in the last course, last time, we were looking at Krishna's revelation. Krishna begins in chapter 10 in particular, actually starting in chapter 7, he begins to unveil himself almost like this onion, peeling this onion away from the divine essence, the divine being, and revealing, lifting one veil after another. And by the time we got to chapter 10, Krishna gives this unveiling of his immanent divine form, in which Krishna is very clear that he is the essence of all creation, that wheresoever you turn, there is the face of God. That's, in a sense, the teaching of chapter 10. That phrase coming from the Quran, but actually an almost identical phrase is in the Gita, where Krishna basically says, wheresoever you turn, I am there. And ultimately, Krishna says that all there is Krishna. Krishna is what is. very similar to what we have, particularly in certain aspects of the New Testament, like in Colossians, which we'll look at, where Christ basically essentially affirms that Christ is the ground and foundation of all of existence. And so, so we have this imminent revelation in chapter 10 from Krishna, essentially teaching us, training us to see God wherever we look, and to open ourselves to that subtle transmission of divinity that is available at every moment, and that ultimately nourishes the deepest part of our souls, so that we are actually trained to live in that constant communion of the beloved with the divine in every interaction, in every breath, in every moment. And then in chapter 11, Arjuna begins by basically saying to Krishna, you know, this is incredible. Show me more. I want to know more. And I want to see you. And he asks to see Krishna in his cosmic form. And so it's a particular moment in the spiritual journey, because it's that point where, having gone part way, the disciple is inspired, if you will, and wants the deeper revelation, wants the full resplendent majesty of God. And Krishna basically says to him, you know, he kind of cautions him and basically says, you can't really see this with your eyes as they are. So I have to give you spiritual vision. And so Krishna gives Arjuna this spiritual vision, which means essentially a sort of lifting of the veils of perception in time and space, of ordinary earthly perception, and essentially lifting the veils on his heart that allows him to be irradiated with the transcendent revelation. And this is an experience that's consistent across the mystical traditions, where at a certain stage, there is a deeper seeing into the very essence of divinity, in which divinity itself shows itself, reveals itself, unveils itself to the disciple who is prepared. And at a certain stage, this is, as Meister Eckhart says, God has no choice, that the heart that is purified becomes emptied of everything except truth, everything except God. And then the heart, as it is purified, becomes a mirror, and God cannot help but be revealed in that mirror. And in a certain sense, that's the stage that that Arjuna has reached at this point in the Gita. And so I'm going to screen share now to go into some of the details. My host is enabling me to screen share. I believe this is it here. So if I go, yeah, okay. So here we are. And at this point, this is a depiction of Krishna and Arjuna. Last week, as I said, we had this revelation from Krishna, and just a couple reminders of that and the parallels with what Christ says. So Krishna says in chapter 10, this is to Arjuna. So Arjuna is there on the left, sort of blown away by all of the revelations. Krishna is there on the right. And Krishna says, whoever knows me as Lord of all worlds without birth or beginning knows the truth and frees himself from all evil. I am the beginning, middle, and end of creation. I am imperishable time. I am the sustainer whose face is seen everywhere. So there's that parallel verse to the Quran. And then we have in Colossians chapter 1:17, we have very similar declaration about Christ where it says, Christ is before all things, and in Christ all things hold together. Christ is also the head of the body, the church, and Christ is the beginning, and Christ is the first place in everything. And so we have these similar kind of profound declarations. Then later in chapter 10, where Krishna says, I am the silence of the unknown, the wisdom of the wise. I am the seed of all existence. Always remember that I am, and I support this entire cosmos with a tiny fragment of my being. And similarly from Colossians, we have chapter 1, Christ is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, both in the heavens and on earth, visible and invisible. Christ is the radiance of his glory and sustains all things by the word of his power. That's from Hebrews chapter 1. So here we have these superlative declarations that are made by both Christ and Krishna. And if we go now to chapter 11, so chapter 10, this is what we went through last week with the imminent revelation of God. And then we come to this transcendent revelation. And this is where Arjuna has asked for this. Krishna then comes and basically says, behold, Arjuna, 1,000,000 divine forms. And so now Arjuna sees this transcendent revelation of Krishna with an infinite variety of color and shape. Behold the gods of the natural world and many more wonders never revealed before. Behold the entire cosmos turning within my body. Beautiful statement. And that is essentially like the fractal revelation of divinity, that within the body of Krishna is the entire cosmos turning. Rumi has that beautiful line where he says, the secret turning in your heart is the entire universe turning. So this is that same revelation. Behold the entire cosmos turning within my body. And of course, here, then he says here, these things cannot be seen with your physical eyes. Therefore, I give you spiritual vision to perceive my majestic power. And then having spoken these words, Krishna revealed to Arjuna his most exalted form and appeared in an infinite number of faces ornamented by heavenly jewels, displaying unending miracles and countless weapons of his power, clothed in celestial garments and covered with garlands, sweet smelling with heavenly fragrances. He showed himself as the infinite Lord, the source of all wonders, whose face is everywhere. If 1,000 suns were to rise in the heavens at the same time, the blaze of their light might resemble the splendor of that supreme spirit. There within the body of the God of gods, Arjuna saw all the manifold forms of the universe united as one. And so Arjuna's response in seeing all this is to really to stand there in both awe and terror, because it's totally overwhelming. And yet at the same time, this is what he asked for, and this is his deep revelation of the divine. So he's transfixed, he can't move. He can only declare, "O Lord, I see within your body all the gods and every kind of living creature. I see Brahma, the creator, seated on a lotus. I see the ancient sages and celestial serpents. I see infinite mouths and arms, stomachs and eyes. You are embodied in every form. I see you everywhere, without beginning, middle, or end. You are the Lord of all creation, and the cosmos is your body. Your radiance is blinding and immeasurable. I see you who are so difficult to behold, shining like a fiery sun, blazing in every direction." So there is just this exquisite, uplifting, fiery revelation of God. And Arjuna is dumbstruck. You are the supreme changeless reality, he says, the one thing to be known. You are the refuge of all creation, the immortal spirit, the eternal guardian of eternal dharma. You are without beginning, middle, or end. You touch everything with your infinite power. The sun and moon are your eyes. Your mouth is fire. Your radiance warms the cosmos. And so there is this transcendent revelation of the Godhead, which is given in different forms across the mystical traditions. And the Gita has a very particular way of revealing it. And it is obviously something that is only available to those who are prepared for it, those who have been prepared for it through the various disciplines and practices that purify the heart and fortify the human faculties to be able to withstand this degree of revelation. And Arjuna then is at some point completely, he's completely shaken, and he basically says to Krishna, I first of all, he says, I'm please forgive me. I just thought you were my friend and I was making jokes with you, like we were two equals in a sense. Please forgive me for all of these presumptuous jokings and informalities. I had no idea who you are. So he basically asks for forgiveness. And then he comes to a place where he says, I am in fear and trembling. Please show me your four-limbed form again. Please come back to the form that you had because I can't take it. And in a way, this is really true of all the great mystics. Of the highest revelation, whether it's Shankara or Ibn Arabi or any of the great mystics across the traditions who've had this revelation, they come back from it. The human being is transcended in that moment. The whole human identity is obliterated in that moment and really cannot maintain that level. There's no I left at that point. The I has been obliterated. The whole sense of human identity is essentially removed. And this is pretty consistent testimony across the mystical traditions. The contingent dimension of one's human existence is in that moment obliterated. And it's not a condition that one can sustain, but it is a condition that leaves one permanently different, coming back from that high summit of realization. And so Arjuna is basically asking to be kind of returned to, in a certain sense, asking Krishna to return to his human form or human-like form, his incarnated form. And Krishna does that. And then when he does that, he says to Arjuna, that which you have seen cannot be seen by austerity, by acts of charity, by study of the scriptures, by chanting the scriptures. All of these things are great and valuable, but they will not bring you to this depth of revelation. And then he says, only by pure-hearted devotion to me alone, can this vision be seen. So similar to what Jesus says. When he says, blessed are the pure of heart, for they shall see God. And it really is that purity of heart that is the key. It's that simple, natural, total honesty, total self-giving, total sincere self-offering that enables that depth of communion to take place. And so this beautiful transmission from Krishna, this revelation from Krishna to Arjuna, has been given at this point. And yet there is still this Arjuna standing there and God before Arjuna revealing God to Arjuna. So there's still a duality. There's still that separation between the disciple and the divine, which is why the Gita doesn't end here. Sometimes some commentators have thought the Gita really should end at chapter 11. That's it. That's the final revelation. Game over. That's it. The divine has revealed itself to the human disciple. The story is over. But it's not over. Just as in traditional Christian mysticism, where you have those 3 stages of purification, illumination, and union, this is really the pinnacle of illumination. This is the total self-luminous revelation of the transcendent Godhead to the devotee. But there's a further stage. It's what what John of the Cross calls the night of spirit, where the human disciple has to go through another whole level of self-transcendence in order to reach a place in which this total union can take place, in which the whole sense of being a separate self or even a separate instrument of God is dissolved. And the way that Sri Aurobindo speaks of it, he says there are really 3 stages to the spiritual journey. The first is that as one comes into the divine life, one experiences oneself as a servant of God, that I am here to do the Lord's work. I am basically serving God and giving myself and my life and all of my actions as a service to God. And over time, what happens is that that sense of being an independent servant begins to dissolve away, and it begins to be basically falling away or dissolved away, crumbling. And there becomes more a sense of being a hollow, empty vessel, like the hollow reed that Rumi speaks of. And the sense of identity moves from being a servant of God to being an instrument, to being like the flute through which God plays divine music into the world. And I am simply an instrument in the hands of God. I myself am limp in a certain sense, almost lifeless, but then God picks me up and uses me, and through me brings divine music into the world. And so there's that sense of being an instrument of God rather than a servant. It's a different quality. There's less I there in the instrument. There's less a sense of Ihood, less a sense of identity as servant, and simply an awareness of being a vehicle, a vessel, or a shell through which God is working. And then there's a third stage, according to Aurobindo, in which that boundary of even being an instrument is dissolved. And then one enters into the very being of God, in which there's no distinction left. And there's no sense of separation left. And as Meister Eckhart describes it so beautifully, he says, this I and that God, the union is so complete that there's no I and no God left, only this isness that acts as one. And then, as Dante says at the very end of the trilogy, my will became one with the will of God, the will that drives the sun and the stars and the cosmos, the love that drives them. My will became one with the love, the cosmic love. And so there is such a total self-giving that there's no self left. There's not even an I to be surrendering, because the I has given up the right to even have an I. It's dissolved into God. And then one is basically in this state of complete oneness with God. So that union of love has basically drawn the two together. As Teresa of Avila speaks of, when the raindrops fall into the water and they become one water, you can no longer distinguish the drops from the lake because they become one. So anyway, those are kind of the stages, and that's where Krishna's headed. Where Arjuna is headed then in the last several chapters of the Gita, as he works through these different dimensions of the deeper levels of transformation. So in chapters 13, there's the whole encounter with the field and the knower of the field, becoming basically, it's that stage in spiritual practice where one identifies with the witness and one is witnessing all of one's experience in the relative realm as an unfolding drama, and one becomes detached from it. And so there's the sense of being the witness of the drama of one's life without necessarily being identified in it. And so this is a certain stage of spiritual practice which is cultivated in chapter 13 with the field and the knower of the field. And then in chapter 14, there's a revelation about what the gunas, we've talked about the gunas before, these three qualities of the Gita, which is a very unique philosophy that all of manifest existence is basically the play of these three forces, which are in Sanskrit, they're called Rajas, Tamas, and Sattva. And Tamas is essentially the principle of inertia, Rajas the principle of energy, and Sattva the principle of conscious harmony. And these three interfold and interplay. You could think of them as matter, energy, and consciousness in a certain sense. And then we come to chapter 15, which is a very interesting chapter because this is where Krishna reveals his supreme abode. And I want to go back to sharing the screen so we can go to exactly what Krishna says here. I think this gets us there. So here is the what is called the Purushottama, the Supreme Spirit. And here Krishna gives, in these three short verses, actually the nature of the transcendent divine in these different aspects. And Krishna says in this world, and I would say rather the better translation would be in this cosmos, are two orders of being, the perishable, separate, and the changeless spirit. So the perishable, separate creature and the changeless spirit. Both of these are in a sense unmanifest. It's a little unclear in this particular translation, but the perishable refers essentially to that which is a changing archetypal quality that is born and dies in a sense. It's something that shifts and changes, so it's perishable, but it's not necessarily manifest. And then there is the changeless spirit. That's the unchanging, the imperishable. But beyond these, there is another, the Supreme Self, the Eternal Lord, who enters into the entire cosmos and supports it from within. So there is essentially, and this is called the Perishable Purusha, which means spirit. So there's the Perishable Purusha, the imperishable Purusha, and then beyond both, there is the Purushottama, the Supreme Spirit, that is beyond both the perishable and the imperishable. And then Krishna declares, I am that Supreme Self, praised by the scriptures as beyond the changing and the changeless. Those who see me in that Supreme Self see truly. They have found the source of all wisdom and they worship me with all their heart. So this is where essentially the Godhead, if you will, is revealing itself as beyond the changing spirit and beyond the changeless spirit, as a third, as a supreme unmanifest abode, which is the true home of God. And this is where Krishna basically finally reveals his highest, most transcendent self. And then he says, I've shared this profound truth with you, Arjuna, those who understand it will attain wisdom, and they will have done that which is to be done. So this is the end of chapter 15. And it then comes, we come to chapter 18. And here is where there is a summary, if you will, of the entire Gita in a way. And chapter 18 has a whole set of teachings on the nature of faith and the different kinds of renunciation and the difference between jnana and tyagya. And so Krishna goes into these different types of renunciation, but then he comes to this point and he says, if you egotistically say, I will not fight this battle. Of course, in this case, in the Gita, it's this particular battle that Arjuna is basically given the task to fight. But the deeper meaning of this is, for any of us, each one of us comes into incarnation to engage in a particular svadharma, as it's called in the Gita, a unique, particular destiny. Each one of us has a task to do, and we are brought here for that purpose. And so that is our divine purpose. We have a particular work to do, and it usually, inevitably, entails a kind of struggle, a kind of bringing some form of divine light, divine justice, divinity, consciousness into some aspect of life. It doesn't have to be something huge and glorified. It can be the simplest thing. Working as a teacher, working as a janitor, working as a servant of life at any one of the different stations of life. But the key is that each one of us has this challenge, has this divine calling. And if you egotistically say, I will not do it, I'm not going to take this up, your resolve will be useless. Your own nature will drive you into it. Your own karma, born of your own nature, will drive you to do even that which you do not wish to do because of your delusion. So your own nature will drive you into that field. And how well you do there depends on how well you connect to the divine source within and are led and guided by that divine source within. And then Krishna says this beautiful thing. He says, the Lord dwells in the hearts of all creatures and whirls them round and round upon the wheel of Maya. And of course, Maya refers to the apparent existence of things. It's essentially the manifest universe in all of its intricate workings. And it's all like a kind of a grand cosmic machine, if you will. And the Lord dwells in the hearts of all creatures and whirls them around in this wheel of Maya, or the Dharma wheel. It's kind of the realm of samsara, if you will. And then Krishna says, run to the Lord for refuge with all your strength, and peace profound will be yours through his grace. So this is basically saying that in this complex world, which is very confusing at times, and so many branched and so many different activities going on, and how do I engage in this world with so many different paths to follow? And the key is here. The key is to go inward to the Lord and take refuge with all your strength, and peace profound will be yours through his grace. And then Krishna says, I give you these precious words of wisdom, reflect on them and do as you choose. This is something really, really important, and something that I've always loved about the Gita, because Krishna here, actually I'll stop share for a minute. There's something very directly personal about this dialogue in the Bhagavad Gita. It is a direct speaking of God to the human soul. And throughout much of the Gita, Krishna speaks about the different practices and tells Arjuna, here's this practice, here's that practice, here's the practice of Jnana Yoga, here's the practice of Karma Yoga, here's the practice of Bhakti Yoga, and Raja Yoga, and Dhyana meditation, and the Sankhya, and all these different threads of the wisdom of India, really, which is part of the glory of the Gita, the way it's all so beautifully integrated. And but what he basically says is, here is my final teaching, Arjuna, and I'm giving you this, and then do as you choose. There is this respect that is afforded from the Godhead to the human being. In the Gita, there's this kind of quality, not of equality. I mean, obviously, this is God speaking to the human being, but there's something so exquisite that I have sometimes found lacking in the Judeo-Christian tradition, where God almost has this attitude that the human beings are really in need of this kind of parental authority and this kind of correction of all your false ways. There's not this sort of even-handed, here is what I have to say. Here is my message. Here is the answer to all of your questions. But you have to choose. It's entirely up to you. And I give you this because you are my beloved, but then you make your choice. And so there's this kind of profound respect from the divine being to the human soul, which I've always found very inspiring. And maybe somehow, for me, it was particularly important because, perhaps because partly I was trained as a scientist, I was trained to trust my own knowing from within and to check it out through my own experimentation, very similar to what the Buddha said. The Buddha said, do not take what I say just because I said it. Check it out for yourself. Verify it for yourself. So there's a kind of, a beautiful kind of acknowledgement that you yourself have the power to discover the truth of these things. You are kind of an independent agent, and I honor your agency. You came to me, you've asked me for these teachings. I'm giving you my wisdom. I'm giving you my most precious pearls. But you need to choose and take them and then do as you choose and do as you will. So I love that kind of, for me, it deepens my faith. It's like there's a validation of the human soul in its own uniqueness as a cosmic entity. And then from that place, Krishna then gives us, going back now, gives us the supreme secret. And he says here, I give you these words, reflect on them, do as you choose. These are the last words I shall speak to you, dear one, for your spiritual fulfillment. You are very dear to me. So Krishna's basically saying, precisely because you are my beloved, I share these words with you. And then comes the supreme secret, which I recited earlier in Sanskrit. Be aware of me always, Arjuna. Adore me. Make every act an offering to me. Bow down to me. And you shall come to me. This I promise, for you are dear to me. So here Krishna is basically saying to Arjuna, I'm sharing this most beloved truth with you because you are my beloved. And the truth is, make me your beloved. Complete this circle of love. I love you. Give your love back to me. And that will complete this profound circle of love. And in doing that, make your every action an offering to me. Bow down to me, and you shall come to me. And he means business. Earlier he says, you shall enter into my being and know me as I am. You literally enter into the living reality of Krishna. And this Krishna is the cosmic Krishna. This is the one that is both beyond the changing and beyond the changeless, and yet supporting both from within. So this is the unifying eternal divine being itself, nothing less than the Godhead. And this I promise to you, says God to the human soul, for you are dear to me. So it's an exquisite promise of divine union. And then comes this, what's called the Chara Mashloka, meaning the ultimate verse, of which there are so many commentaries and deep, entire traditions based on this, because of the different interpretations of it. And the whole Sri Vaishnavite tradition, I write about this quite a bit in my book. But the bottom line here, Krishna says to Arjuna, abandon all dharmas, take refuge in me alone. I shall purify you from all. Sins is not really the right word, because sin is more, carries a kind of connotation, a Christian judgmental connotation, unless we understand sin as missing the mark. But you can think of this word, papabhyo, as the Sanskrit word, more as mistakes, limitations, misguided actions, whatever it is. I shall liberate you and purify you from all of this. Moksha, liberate you is really more an accurate term. I shall liberate you from all of these misguided mistakes, failings, limitations. Do not grieve. Abandon all dharmas and take refuge in me alone. And in that statement is essentially the exact same statement that happens for Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he's wavering, where he says, Abba, Father, if it's possible, take this cup from my lips. And then he basically surrenders and says, not my will, but thine be done. This is the absolute taking refuge, even at the cost of his own, contingent life, his independent self-existence, that total unconditional surrender, which is the ultimate act of love. I mean, what more can we do to show our love than to lay down our life for our beloved, as Jesus said? No one hath greater love than this, than to lay down their life for a friend. So, and Arjuna is in that precise position. He's being asked to go out on the battlefield, and he may well get killed. And earlier in the book, Krishna says, if you win, you gain the earth. If you die, you gain heaven. So either way, you win. So there's no guarantee when Arjuna goes into battle that he's going to survive, or at least Krishna doesn't give him that guarantee. He does protect him throughout the ensuing battle later. But the bottom line here is this exquisite self-giving of the human disciple to God in order to complete this communion of total love. And then what happens is the supreme secret. So the real secret is never even spoken, because what then happens is this total uplifting of the human soul into the divine being. And then that whole dance of living the life as one with God that is spoken of by the mystics, and every one of them says that words are inadequate. There's no way that they can do justice to this experience. They can't even begin to speak about it in language. And there is that birthing of the Christ, the Krishna consciousness through the human disciple that is, as I understand, the highest goal and purpose of human existence, because it's returning to the root of who we are. It's returning to that deep truth of who and what we ultimately are, which is that we are Christ, we are Krishna. We are none other than that in our deepest essence. And so there's no greater goal than to return to that. And then from that foundation, to then live a life of action in this world as a living ambassador, if you will, as a living droplet of Krishna, of Christ's consciousness. And that's the great glory of the spiritual journey, if you will. I want to read, before we take some questions and have small groups, I want to read just a couple of commentaries from some of the great commentaries about this last verse. You know, I've been contemplating this for, I don't know, almost 30 years. And those words, you know, Mam Ekam Sharanam Vraja, have such a deep resonance. They just live in my heart. It's like, take absolute refuge in me. It's actually, Yogananda has a bit different way of translating it. He says, Mam Ekam, in my oneness, take refuge from the world. In my oneness, which is like Advaita, non-dual, or Tawheed in Arabic. It is that oneness of divinity, which is the truth of existence, which is that it is all one, taking refuge in that oneness. And then one is one with everything, one with every being, one with every tree, every grain of sand, every bird. And so taking refuge in that oneness, you are then liberated from all of the failings. And there is this basically there is just a blessing moment to moment that is kind of breathed in and breathed out. And you know, we've all had some glimpse of this at different levels. My understanding is that once you've had a really genuine glimpse of this, you really want nothing else but to bring others to this same glimpse, because there's nothing more precious than this mystical union with the Supreme. And I also want to say, although this is couched in traditional terms with Krishna as a male god, this is a total revelation and union with the feminine dimension of God, as well as the masculine. So there's no gender division here. And actually, Sri Aurobindo makes that very clear, because Sri Aurobindo speaks about the Divine Mother and the Divine Shakti. And he's very specific. By the way, I'm bringing him up because one of the best commentaries by far ever written is the commentary on the Gita, essays on the Gita, written by Sri Aurobindo. And it's important, the reading the translations of the Gita by the Indian masters themselves, because it's easy to read an English translation and project onto it with the words that are used of God and faith. In Sanskrit, for example, the word shraddha, which is usually translated as faith, has a much different meaning. And what it really means is the deepest convictions of the heart. And it's a different thing from faith, because faith can be understood as belief, or faith sometimes is understood as convictions of the heart. But in Sanskrit, it's very unambiguous. As your shraddha is, so you are. Shraddha is this deep, inner, deepest truth of the heart that is the essence of who you are. And that is the reason that purification is so important, because as you purify, as you eliminate all of the clutter in the heart, what happens is the deepest truth of the heart coalesces into this one strong, burning, yearning fire that then is the fire that takes you back to God and that unites you with the fire of God. So this fire of love in the heart, which is really the source of that shraddha that is spoken of in the Gita. So you have these different Sanskrit terms, and they have very particular meanings. English translations are really Western interpretations, if you will, as is true of all scriptures of other languages. And so it's particularly valuable to read the Indian masters like Sri Aurobindo and Swami Nikhilananda, Swami Pravananda, and others, because and Swami Vivekananda, because they have grown up in India, they have lived this whole tradition, but they also have learned the Western tradition. They're able to convey it as best as possible. So Sri Aurobindo says here about the Gita, And about this supreme secret, he says, the Gita throughout has been insisting on a great and well-built discipline of yoga, a large and clearly traced philosophical system on the Svabhava and the Svadharma, on the Sattvic law of life, as leading out of itself by a self-exaltation to a free spiritual dharma of immortal existence that is wide in its spaces and lifted high beyond the limitations of even this highest guna. And now, in this Chara Mashloka, where the Gita says, abandon all dharmas, take absolute refuge in me alone. Now suddenly the Gita seems to break out of its own structure and says to the human soul, abandon all dharmas, give thyself to the divine alone, to the supreme Godhead above and around and within thee. And this is all that you ultimately need. This is the truest and greatest way. This is the real deliverance. Now, it's very important to recognize that this teaching was not given at the beginning of the Gita. This teaching was only given at the end. And it really cannot be given at the beginning. And in a certain sense, it's premature to get this teaching too early, because all of those disciplines, prior disciplines, are actually required in order to prepare the disciple for the full radical power and empowerment of this teaching. And if you try to implement this teaching prematurely, if you abandon all practices and disciplines and say, oh, I'm just going to follow, I'm going to surrender absolutely, what will happen is that some of those impurities, it sounds like judgmental. I don't mean to be judgmental, but those untransformed parts of ourselves that still need transformation, they will trip you up before you realize it. So the Gita has a logic to it. It takes you through these stages. And it's important not to bypass them. It's important that we go through these disciplines. But it's also important to recognize that ultimately, God wants nothing more than to actually reach down and lift you up into the essence of God. As we were saying last time, as my teacher said to me, most of spiritual practice, we are pursuing God. We are pursuing the beloved. But at some point, she said, there comes a point where God pursues you. There comes a point where the beloved itself pursues you, and that is when the whole table's turned. Aurobindo writes about this very beautifully. In a moment, I'll get to it. Let me just finish this last part. So he says, and now speaking as the Spirit and the Godhead in the human being, says to the human disciple, all this personal effort and self-discipline will not in the end be needed. All following and limitation of rule and dharma can at last be released as encumbrances if thou canst make a complete surrender to me. Depend alone on the Spirit and Godhead within thee, and all these things, and trust to that sole guidance. Turn all of thy mind to me alone, and fill it with the thought of me and my presence. Turn all thy heart to me. Make thy every action, whatever it be, a sacrifice and an offering to me. That done, then leave me to do my will with thy life and thy soul and action. Do not be grieved or perplexed by my dealings with your mind and heart and life and works. Do not be troubled because they may not always seem to follow the laws and dharma that humanity imposes on itself to guide the limited will and intelligence. My ways, this is God speaking, my ways are the ways of a perfect wisdom and power and love that knows all things and combines all movements in view of a perfect result. So this is the working according to the ways of God, that God will basically reweave your life according to the law and the ways of God. And then Aurobindo says here, this is the idea where God starts to pursue you. For a time comes in spiritual development when we become aware that all our effort and action are only our mental and vital reactions to the silent and secret insistence of a greater presence and power that is in and around us. It is borne in on us that all our yoga, all our aspiration and our endeavors are imperfect or narrow forms, because disfigured at least by the mind's associations, demands, prejudgments, predilections, mistranslations, or half translations of a far vaster truth. Our ideas and experiences and efforts are mental images only of the greatest things, which would be done more perfectly, directly, freely, largely, and more in harmony with the universal and eternal will, by that power itself, by God, Him herself. If we could only put ourselves passively in the hands of a supreme and absolute strength and wisdom, that power is not separate from us. It is our own self, and one with the self of all others. And it is also at the same time a transcendent being and an immanent person. So this is basically the nature of the Godhead. It is the deepest truth of who we are. And as we turn ourselves completely over, that takes over our lives and remakes us from the outside, from the inside out. And that is why, as Meister Eckhart says so beautifully, that the outer work can never be great if the inner work is small. If we haven't done this inner work, then what we do outwardly can never be great. And then he says, and the outer work can never be small if the inner work is great. If we do this inner work, if we do this connection with the source, then what we do in the world is far greater. Even if it's not noticed, because remember, greatness is not necessarily what the world recognizes as greatness, but it is the work that God will take through you once you have given yourself over completely to God. It cannot help but be great, because it's not your greatness anymore. As Jesus said, only God is great, because then God is doing God's work through you and in you and as you. So that's where we are led to. And the human personality, the last thing I'll say, because I love this commentary. This is from Sri Krishna Prem, who I think wrote the best. There's so many commentaries on the Gita, but this one is, in my opinion, one of the very best. And what he says here is that in this deep essence of the teaching of the Gita, there is an honoring of every single unique human being, that for the absolute gift that you are, and the very thing that has been hampering you, which is your personal prejudices and predilections, get transmuted into your personal gift to become a unique ray of loving contribution to the sacred tapestry of life. And without you, there would be a hole in life itself. So each one of us is given a particular, in Sanskrit, it's the Svadharma. And I love that, because there's something unique. Each one of us has a unique, particular purpose in the divine cosmic order. And this is here's how he puts it. He says that it is only against our personal background, and because we stand all along on the firm basis of personal feeling, that we are able to enjoy the adventure into impersonality. So we go into this impersonal aspect. This is the imperishable Purusha, where we identify as the witness. And we come into this place of witnessing everything. But if we stay there, he says, a world devoid of personality would be not merely a poorer world, but an infinitely poorer world. Here, Krishna reveals that hidden in the very heart of our personality and even our personal failings is the mystic jewel, unknown to the impersonal being of gods, who themselves covet human birth. This is this whole idea in the Indic traditions generally, that the gods are jealous of the birth of the incarnation in human form because we have that opportunity to go to the highest levels of realization. And here he says, the innermost human treasure, Sri Krishna's richest and inmost being, intensest being, is approachable through personal surrender and personal love alone. Therefore, it is not true that personality is mere illusion to be dissolved in the impersonal vastness. And sometimes that is how people understand, for example, the teachings of the Upanishads. You are that, I am Brahman. And so the personality of me is to be dissolved into the infinite ocean of Brahman. And the Gita, according to Krishna Prema, is saying that's not true. The greatest of those that we meet in the spiritual life shine with more, not less personality than do the common folk. And when we pass beyond them to the great divine incarnations, such as Sri Krishna, Rama, Buddha, Christ, we find the same personal quality raised, as it were, to an infinite intensity. The calm, compassionate gaze of the Buddha, the burning intensity of Christ, and the laughing, intimate glances of Sri Krishna's dancing eyes, all these supreme beings are infinitely personal. And it is just these qualities that draw our hearts and draw them with a strength that is far beyond the power of all mere teaching. And so what I love about this is that that which is unique to us is ultimately exalted through this full revelation and turned into a very particular gift that each one of us brings to life. And I really hold in my heart this prayer that the human family will come to that place, that we are intended to evolve to that place where we are each literally walking gods and goddesses on this planet, and that each person will be a revelation of divinity unto the other, because that is how we are intended to be. And that with that spiritual vision, we would see through each human incarnation another resplendent facet of the Godhead, uniquely expressed, which we see through Christ and through Buddha and through the prophets down through the ages. But we are to be the same. We are called to the same. So I want to now invite us into small groups. So if we could come into groups.
Will Nudge has a question.
Oh.
What verses they were page in the essay that you're reading? It's in the chat box.
Okay. The page in the essays. I'm assuming that's essays on the Gita that she's asking about. So I will put that in the chat box. And meanwhile, I'm going to put people in small groups. And here's the question I want you to address in small groups. To the extent that you have gotten to know each other, in whatever way you've gotten to know each other, what do you see as that unique swadharma, that divinity? How do you see that divinity of one another shining through? So if you can be a mirror to one another. And so we'll take 3 minutes each, and we'll do this in groups of 3. Does that work for us, Garrett? So groups of 3. And some of you may not know each other very well, but others of you will know each other in different ways. Some of you quite well, perhaps. But I want you to really reflect on how you see the light of the divine shining through this being, and offer that reflection back. This is not about flattery. This is simply to bear witness to what you experience as that unique quality of divinity that comes through this particular person. So take a few minutes. There will be 3 of you, and so you'll each have about 3 minutes. That means one of you receives and the other 2 share with you what they see as your particular unique gift to life and unique expression of divinity as best they're able to see it. And then we'll come back and have time for closing questions. And I am going to give the verses here. Okay, Mudge has to leave, so I will send that to her by email. Okay, so are we ready, Garrett?
Yes.
Okay, so here we go. See you in a bit.
So you want to say goodbye to YouTube?
Yes, and for those of you on YouTube, thank you for joining us. Thank you for being in this course, and bless you. And may the Christ and Krishna always be with you.